The birth of Maui. Rata and Hine had climbed down to the rocks where the big waves crashed against the headland. Father had said that he was going out with the fishermen in the big canoe towards the island of Taranga. The canoe had left early in the morning and the children had hurried down to see it go past. They had a favorite spot above the waves where the spray sometimes dashed in their faces. When they got to the place, they found that their old friend Popo was already sitting there. He was too old to go out with the fishermen or to go on the war trail, but he loved to see the canoe speeding out of the harbor with flashing paddles and to hear the chant of the paddlers. The children were glad to see Popo because he was always ready to tell them a story, but the story had to wait until the canoe had gone past. A big wave rushed between the rocks and curled over with a tremendous crash, sending up a great mass of foam and water and a cloud of spray which tasted salty on their lips. This is more like the Taitamatane, said Popo. Taitamatane, the sea of men, said Rata. What does that mean, Popo? That is the name of the West Coast, Popo said. There are not many harbors there, Rata, and with the westerly winds behind them, the long waves crashed and thundered against the cliffs and beaches of that coast. Someday, someday you will see for yourself. It is the kind of sea which needs strong men at the paddles of the canoe. This coast of ours is sunny and sheltered. There are many harbors like ours with sandy beaches and trees growing almost in the water, so we call it the Sea of Women. It is a wonderful place for fishing, but today the sea god is angry. It is the kind of day when strong men must be at the paddles of the canoe. Here it is, shouted Hine. They stood up to watch. It was a wonderful sight. The harbor was like a great round calabash or bowl with a tiny entrance guarded by rocks so that you could throw a stone from one side to another. Inside the harbor was calm and sheltered, but the sea roared and fought with the rocks at the entrance. They heard the sound of the paddlers chant as the canoe came closer. A little white wave rose above the bow in the smooth water, and then the carved bow piece began to rise and fall. Soon the canoe reached the narrow opening. The chant of the paddlers grew louder, the waves crashed against the sides of the canoe, and the steersman strained to hold it straight and true. At one moment the great vessel pointed at the sky, slid over the crest of the wave, and sank into the trough of the waters. The children could see it below them. They looked down at the men and saw the deck of manuka sticks, the narrow seats, the neatly coiled flax fishing lines, and the shining hooks. They made no sound, but looked proudly at their father as he stood in the prow, watching for the rocks that lay beneath the surface of the water. Another giant wave lifted the canoe again. It swung on the crest, and as it slid down the far side, father gave a signal. The men on the side dipped their paddles deeply in the smooth water, and the steersman braced himself to take the strain. The canoe leaned sideways, turned towards them for a second, and then raced out into the open sea. Popo sat down in his own special place, where the waves had long ago worn a smooth channel which was wide enough for his fat body. A sea of men, he said again. More than one canoe has been smashed to pieces here. For a while they were all silent, watching the canoe grow smaller and smaller until it was like an insect with moving legs walking over the water. There were times when it was hidden by the big rollers, but always it climbed the hills of water until at last it was only a speck in the distance. The children scrambled amongst the rocks, watching the kelp surge in on the waves and then double over itself and draw quickly back towards the sea, over and over again. Amongst the broken shells and pebbles on a tiny beach nearby, they found the shells of sea urchins and pieces of driftwood carved into strange shapes by the waves. Hine found a smooth brown thing which he took to Popo. The old man had been asleep and he opened his eyes drowsily. It's a nut, he said. It doesn't come from our own land. The wind and the waves have washed it for thousands of miles across the ocean, and at last it has reached our own village. That was how Maui was once washed ashore. Do you remember what I told you about him yesterday? Of course we remember. Tell us more about him, Popo. Was he a god? Well, a kind of god, Popo said. He was partially man and partially god. He was a merry fellow. He did a lot of good, but to some people he did some harm. Would you like to hear another story about him? Yes, please, said the brother and sister together. Did he really come ashore like this nut? Yes, just like this nut. Perhaps this is the best way to tell a story like this. While the sea throws all sorts of things onto the shore at our feet. Let us travel in our minds far over the sea, out of sight of the land. There was only blue sky above and blue waves underneath. The sky rested on the very edges of the sea, and in the middle a bundle of seaweed rose and fell on the long swell of the ocean. Above it, the seabirds circled round and round, crying and flapping their wings. Now and again, one of them flew down and pecked at the bundle and flew away. In the middle of the seaweed, there was a tangle of hair, and in the middle of this, like a young bird in a nest, lay a tiny baby. He kicked his legs and gave happy little cries as he lay in his gently rocking cradle. Underneath him were the deep waters where the huge sea monsters swam and fought and preyed on smaller fish. But the baby knew nothing about them. The sun warmed him, and the seagulls sang a strange lullaby as they soared and fluttered over the floating cradle. The baby was Maui. He was just a tiny little scrap of thing. Because his mother didn't know that he was alive, she had cut off her hair and wrapped him in it and pushed him into the water. She had watched him float away on the ebbing tide. But Maui was alive. The sea god and the creatures of the ocean were kind to him. For a long time they rocked him and cared for him, and in the end they carried him gently to another land. The waves washed him onto a soft bed of sand. The baby kicked away the seaweed and the clinging uh, strands of hair and lay there happily. But soon clouds covered the sun, and the land birds looked at him hungrily. Flies buzzed round, and the wind was cold. Baby Maui began to cry. He could not understand what was happening to him and gave a piercing wail. Not far away from where the baby lay lived Tama, who was a god of the sea. He had built the house on the cliffs where he could look out across the great ocean. He had not seen the little bundle of seaweed and jellyfish washed ashore, but he heard the cry of the baby. He looked everywhere, but he could see nothing except the heap of seaweed on the sand. That is strange, said Tama to himself. Why should the ghost keep flying over it? I had better go and have a look at it. He went down the steep path and along the beach until he came to the heap of seaweed. He bent over it, and again he heard the cry of a baby. But although it was close, it was very faint now. Tama picked off the jellyfish and pulled the fronds of seaweed away. There was little Maui, nearly dead with the cold. He took the baby up in his arms and hurried back to his home. It was cold inside the weir. Tama tied little Maui to the rafters and put more wood on the fire. The warm air rose upwards, and the baby began to cough and move his arms and legs. Presently he felt more comfortable and began to laugh. Tama took him down, wrapped him in a soft feather cloak, and put him to sleep in the corner. This was Maui's first adventure, though he was too young to remember it. Tama was very glad to have someone with him in his lonely house. Even though it was only a baby, he soon found that he did not have so much time to spend looking at the sea. Babies need a great deal of care and have to be looked after. They cannot do anything for themselves, as you know. Tama was kept busy looking after Maui, pounding food so that it was soft and easy to eat, talking to him and playing games with him. Maui grew quickly. As soon as he was able to toddle, he went outside and held out his arms to the birds, which fluttered down and played with him. Tama used to stand at the door and smile at the little boy. Somehow the birds seemed to understand that what Maui said to them. They let him pull their feathers and roll them over and over in the grass. Tama loved his little boy, and as he grew tall and strong, they spent long hours together. Tama told him the wisdom of the sea, how fishes lived and spoke to each other. He told him how other people lived, how they worked and hunted for birds and fish, how they grew kumaris in their gardens and dug fern roots and gathered berries. He told stories of battles and raids and how men and women danced and sang in the great meeting houses at night. Maui loved to hear these things. Best of all was the magic that old Tama told him when he uh, firelight uh, flickered on the walls and the carved figures of his house at night, and the stars twinkled outside. He listened to everything that Tama told him and stored it up in his mind. The friendship he had for the birds of the sea and the forest as a little boy grew stronger as the years passed by. He knew their names and their habits. When some of them flew across the thousands of miles of ocean in the spring, they came to greet their friend Maui. All my life I shall love you, Maui said. We will always be friends, and the birds flew round him and twittered. Friends, you have been a good boy to one who is your father, yet not your father. Thomas said one night, you think you will stay here forever because I have been like a father and a mother to you, but you are growing up and soon you will go away. I can feel it in these old bones. What will you do when I go away? Maui asked him. I will sit in the veranda of my house and look over the sea as I did before you came, Maui. I will remember how the waves brought you to me when you were a baby. I will remember how you grew into a little boy and then into a young man. I will remember the games we played together and how you made friends with birds and fishes. I will remember the deep magic I taught you, and I will watch you still, not with these old eyes of mine, which do not see very well now, but with the eyes of the spirit. What will you do, Maui? I will go to my own people. I will be a man. Yes, Tama said. You will go to your own people. You will leave the old man who has taught you so much. You will do many wonderful things, Maui. Some people will love you and some will be impatient because you are sometimes mischievous and cruel. Try not to hurt others. Do good, and I will say the magic spells that will keep you from harm. Yes, I will try to do good, Maui said, really meaning it. But we shall see that he could never be good for very long, and Tama knew this too. You will play many tricks, but I know you will do good things as well. Remember the old Tama who loved you. Another summer came, and Maui had grown into a young man, but Tama was old and bent. You must go now, Maui, he said. Soon I will go to the leaping place into the underworld, when I will find the friends of my boyhood. It is not right for you to stay here and any longer. Maui was sorry to have to say goodbye to his old friends, but he was anxious to go out into the woods where there were others who were young like himself. Tama raised his hands over him in blessing, and Maui ran down the path and led into the forest. He skipped and jumped with excitement. For once he had no time to talk to the birds. Stop and play with us, Maui, they sang, but he took no notice. The leaves of the trees brushed against him, and the supplejack tried to trip him up, but he pushed them aside. All day long he ran down into the valleys and up the hilltops, stopping only to drink from the little streams. He crossed a wide plain and climbed the hill. From the top he could see the country spread out below him, with lakes and rivers and forests, and far away he saw houses and smoke going up in the still air. He knew that there were his people and that the little village was his home. Perhaps his mother had lit the fire for the evening meal. He plunged down the hillside, running faster than ever. Darkness fell, but somewhere he could hear voices singing, and they guided him onwards. There was a clear space in front of the house, and in one of them he could see a light. He peered round the open door and saw there was a fire burning on the floor. There were four young men there, all taller and older than himself, and further away a beautiful woman whom he was sure must be his mother. He slipped inside the house like a shadow and sat down behind the young man without being seen. Presently his mother came over to the young man and said, Stand up when I call you, so that we may dance, Mawitaha. The tallest of the young men stood up and said, I am ready, mother. That's one, she said. Maui Rota, that's two. Maui Pae, that's three. Maui Waho, that's four. All my sons are ready. Then our Maui stood up and came out of the shadows. I am Maui too, he said. His mother looked at him in surprise. Oh no, you're not Maui. All my sons are here. I counted them myself. Yes, I'm Maui, the boy said again. These are my brothers. See, I know their names. Maui Taha, Maui Rota, Maui Pai, and Maui Waho. Now I have come, and I am Maui, the littlest one. I have never seen you before, his mother replied, while Maui Taha, Maui Rota, Maui Pai, and Maui Waho stared at him. No, you cannot be Maui, little stranger. I have no other sons. Are you sure, my mother? She told, yes, there was one, a tiny little baby, so small that the wind would have blown him away. But we shall never see him again, for he is dead. Where do you come from, stranger? His mother picked up a burning log from the fire and held it close to his face. What, what is my name? She asked. You are my mother. Your name is Taranga. Her eyes filled with tears. She leaned forward and clasped him in her arms. Yeah, you are indeed my little Maui, she said. I have found you again. You are the youngest Maui, and I shall call you Maui Tiki Tiki Ataranga. You will live here with your brothers, and you will be my own little son again. And so it was the Maui came to his mother's home and lived with his brothers. But he was not always popular, for he was a born mischief. He was clever too, and clever people are not always popular. When kites were being flown, Maui's kite always flew highest. When they played tag, which they called we, Maui always ran the fastest. When darts were being thrown, Maui's fern frond always went the farthest. At the breath holding game, Maui could always recite the longest. At swimming and diving, he was always best. He was a friend of all the forest folk, and because of the magic he had learned from Tama, he could turn himself into a bird and escape from his brothers when they were angry with him. Because he was clever and better at games than his brothers, they were often annoyed with him, but Maui didn't mind. He laughed merrily and went off to play with his friends the birds and practice the magic that Tama had taught him. What happened to him when he grew up? Rat asked. Oh ho! That is another story, Popo chuckled. Think of how he came, children, not what happened afterwards. Every time you see something strange brought up by the sea, remember little Maui who came ashore on a big wave wrapped in his mother's hair. Remember Maui Tiki Tiki Ataranga. Thank you for listening.